Hello there, and welcome to another episode of News from the Gelding. Okay, so today I thought I would talk about one of my favourite science fiction novels of all time, Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. Now, this is a Soviet-era Russian science fiction novel. You don't get many of those to the penny, and in fact this is the only one I've ever read. But it's an absolute masterpiece, I believe. It was first published in Russia in 1972, but it wouldn't see its English translation until the late 70s, where it was thereby disseminated in the West and recognised as the masterwork that it is. I first came across this when I was at art college, in the film version, which was made in 1979 by Andrei Tarkovsky. They had a vast collection of art house films, as you can imagine. And this one took my interest because I saw it was a science fiction topic. It's almost 3 hours long. I only made it halfway through because I had previous night been involved in an evening of debauchery involving copious amounts of alcohol. But I saw enough that whetted my appetite. 5 years later, I was perusing a list of masterworks of science fiction, and I came across the title Roadside Picnic, and it struck me as an odd title right there and then, so I thought I'd just read it off the bat. I didn't know then that it was related to the film Stalker, and it was an incredible read. I read it again last year just to refamiliarise myself with it. And it was just as good the second time, if not better. So what is it about? So it's about a visitation, what's called in the book a visitation, over a period of 2 days, 6 separate areas spread across an undisclosed patch of land, which I'm assuming is somewhere in Russia. Something happens, something strange happens. The laws of physics are changed. Odd alien artifacts are left behind. The indigenous populations are all wiped out. So something big has happened. But all that's left is these altered areas, or zones as they're called in the book. What I'm going to do is start off by reading just a short paragraph from the very beginning of the novel, where an interviewer is asking questions of a doctor who is an expert on the visitation. And so he's asking him about the Pillman Radiant, named after the doctor. The Pillman Radiant is really very simple. Imagine taking a large globe, giving it a good spin, then firing a few rounds into it. The bullet holes on the globe would fall on a certain smooth curve. The crux of my so-called important discovery is the following simple observation. All 6 visit zones are positioned on the surface of the planet like bullet holes made by a gun located somewhere between Earth and Deneb. Deneb is the alpha star of Cygnus, while the Pillman Radiant is just our name for the point in space from which, so to speak, the shots were fired. Now, if that doesn't get your juices going, I don't know what will. So, these areas have been totally messed with. The laws of physics have changed. Gravity doesn't behave as it should do in certain areas. Shadows may appear skewed in directions that are not related to the position of the sun. The dead become alive again, these twitching abominations that just walk around. And because of these alterations, these zones have become very dangerous places. But they contain wonders. These artifacts that have been left behind are very valuable and sought after. So there are things like eternal batteries that never lose their charge and self-replicate, so they produce more batteries. And later on, those are used to power cars by humans. There are things called empties, which are 2 copper discs that are suspended over one another, but with nothing in between. but they're held rigidly as though describing an invisible jar. There are full empties, which are very rare things whereby the two discs contain a blue liquid within them. There's all manner of things that are just subtly suggested but not really elaborated on. There's a ring that once you spin it, it never stops spinning. So it's very, very odd things. So the government, whichever government this is, one assumes it's, the Soviet government, have ring-fenced these areas, ostensibly to protect the outside population from contamination of from these zones, to stop anything crawling out of these zones, perhaps. But the main reason really is to protect them for themselves, to have sole dominion over these various artifacts that are very valuable, and you can see why, for various applications. So, of course, if you have this system, you're going to have people that are trying to subvert it. And so you have these men that are called stalkers, these renegades that go into these areas under cover of darkness and try to pilfer these artifacts and sell them on the black market. It's a very dangerous pursuit because the government patrol these areas, and if they see you, they'll shoot you dead anyway. But once you're in there, obviously you're subject to all of these strange phenomena. The problem is with a lot of these things that are wrong with these zones is that you can't see them. So you end up having to carry like stones with you and throw them to see what happens to them. Now, one of the main protagonists we follow throughout the story at various stages of his life and his relationship with the zones is called Redrick, or Red. Shoeheart, I think he's called, Redrick Shoeheart. And he's one of these renegade stalkers. And we meet him at the beginning where he's working for the government. So he's helping them to get things out of there because they're bloody useless at it. But he's very experienced, obviously. He's been doing it for a while, naughty boy. But he also has a kind of intuition. He knows, just looking at certain areas, a puddle may not look right, or a gust of wind may not feel quite right. And so he's very cautious. But he goes in with the scientists who are very cocksure of themselves. They fear the zone, but at the same time they feel as though because they're scientists, I suppose, that they'll be okay, perhaps. Anyway, he helps them to recover a rare artifact, which is one of the full empties, the copper discs with the blue liquid inside. And in so doing, we get to see some of his personality, his quirks. He's quite an interesting chap, very likable, but we get to see the care that he takes in doing this. He's very, very careful and diligent, and his annoyance at the scientists that they don't respect him, perhaps. I mean, he's, poor working class chap. So that's an interesting dynamic. In so doing, they recover this rare artifact, but something goes wrong. One of the scientists gets too close to something very strange and ephemeral, something like a cobweb, which goes on his back and disappears. Later on, this is a spoiler, he dies. But this is right at the very beginning of the book, so don't worry. So we follow Redheart through his life, really, in his kind of struggle with money, trying to support he gets a wife eventually, and they have a child. Now, this is a pretty big spoiler here as well, so, be aware. It's not recommended that you have children if you dally too long in these zones, because there's a theory that it's altering or mutating your DNA in certain ways. Anyway, they have a child and it seems to be okay. But this child, although apparently okay, she grows a kind of a fine fur all over her, like a kind of golden monkey almost. And she's able to do telekinesis, things like that. It's very odd. So in trying to support his family, he agrees to try and get something out that could be used as a weapon of mass destruction, for example. So he ends up doing that at one point, but once he's done it, he draws a line over it, under it, doesn't want to do any more. But because of his child and the fact that she's beginning to lose her humanity very slowly, he agrees to go in one last time to find the rarest object of them all, something that's been alluded to a number of times, the Golden Globe, which is an artifact that apparently grants you wishes. So he goes back in to try and cure his daughter, basically. So that's all I'll say on the story itself. But there we are. That's it in a nutshell. Now, the reasons why I think this book is great is the same kind of reasons that I loved, like Rendezvous with Rama, for example. Nothing is explained or indeed explainable. It's kind of, and that engenders a sense of wonder and mystery that some hard science fiction doesn't quite give you, because everything is explained, even though things can be quite wonderful, even those explained. Things that are unexplainable are even more wonderful in my eyes. There's also the de-anthropocentric idea that this is what's happened on Earth has nothing to do with us. And so it suggested that the aliens themselves probably didn't even recognize that we were there in the first place. Quite often we have alien invasion stories or whatever where they're just gunning for humans. But what if the aliens don't even know that the humans exist? And even if they do know, they don't give a shit. So I'm going to read one more passage, and this relates specifically to the naming of the book, giving it the name Roadside Picnic. Okay, so for this little excerpt, it's from the only chapter that doesn't relate specifically to Redrick and his life and experiences with the Zone. This is a chap called Noonan, who's a rep for electronic suppliers. I think is related to the eternal batteries and their application with human vehicles. Anyway, he's having a discussion with another scientist about what this visit may have been, what it meant. So here we go. This is Noonan. What about the visit? What do you think about the visit? Certainly, said Valentine, the scientist. Imagine a picnic. Noonan jumped. What did you say? A picnic. Imagine a forest, a country road, a meadow. A car pulls off the road into the meadow and unloads young men, bottles, picnic baskets, girls, transistor radios, cameras. A fire is lit, tents are pitched, music is played. And in the morning they leave. The animals, birds and insects that were watching the whole night in horror crawl out of their shelters. And what do they see? An oil spill, a gasoline puddle, old spark plugs and oil filters strewn about, scattered rags, burnt out bulbs. Someone has dropped a monkey wrench. The wheels have tracked mud from some godforsaken swamp, and, of course, there are the remains of the campfire, apple cores, candy wrappers, tins, bottles, someone's handkerchief, someone's penknife, old ragged newspapers, coins, wilted flowers from another meadow. I get it, said Noonan. A roadside picnic. Exactly. A picnic by the side of some space road. And you ask me whether they'll come back? There we are in a nutshell. They don't care. They may not have even known we were there in the first place. Their means of conveyance across space, we've no idea what they're doing, why they've left things behind. They've just discarded them and don't need them anymore. Maybe they spent 2 days on Earth, but to them it was longer. Who knows? There's lots of questions there, and it gets you thinking. The other thing I really liked about this was the human element, the humanity's relationship to what's happened, the changes that have been wrought on these areas and the things that have been left behind. The illicit trade, the government wanting to control this trade, wanting to get items from these areas that are very, very dangerous, that might be used as weapons of mass destruction. There's also the struggle of the working class. Redrick's, he keeps going into these zones. He doesn't want to, but he has to. He has to learn. He has to earn money where he can and provide for his family. Anyway, there we are. I don't know if I've covered it as well as I could have, but I read it about 4 months ago, reread it, and I'd already forgotten a lot about it. But the sense of wonder, the mystery, those things will get you through this, and you'll be thinking very deeply afterwards, I imagine. But anyway, there we are. That's my attempt. Thank you for watching. And if you don't do anything else, go and read that book. And subscribe if you wish. Thank you very much. Cheerio. Hello and welcome to another episode of News from the Gelding. 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 Now, this was a Russian era bastard. Okay, so today I thought I would talk about and recommend fucking bastard. Roadside Picnic by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. Hopefully, doodle bastard. Boris and Arkady Strugatsky fucking bastard. So in 1970 fuck. Okay, today I thought I would talk about one of my favourite science fiction books of all time. I would put this up in the top 5 of all the ones many science fiction of. I would put this in my top 5 of all the ones I've ever read. And doo cunt. Disseminated. Translation was then disseminated, cunt, disseminated. Is that a fucking word? But it wouldn't be until the later 70s where the English translation was then disseminated amongst the Western countries. In the West, motherfucker! So this is about a chap called Noonan, who is a buyer of electronics. What the fuck is he? I don't know. Oh, you can. So this focuses on a chap called Noonan, who is a buyer of. Is he a buyer? Or you just read it, you tit. Who's a rep for electronics cunt. A car pulls off the road into the meadow and unloads young men, bottles, picnic blankets, baskets. You can't even fucking read, mate.